Have you ever noticed how painted images are all around us? That's where I come in. I'm a curator at an art gallery. I choose paintings for people to look at, and I'm on a mission to show you why looking is worth it, to show you why painting matters. It can challenge you, play with you, and even lift your soul. Come with me on this journey through art and you'll see the world through new eyes. Once religion was at the heart of art. But what place does it have on canvas today? The modern world is full of doubts, and some of the biggest of those doubts are spiritual. What's our place and purpose in the universe? Is there something bigger than us worth believing in? Now, for centuries, painting had power and purpose because it answered these big questions of faith. But these days, does painting have the power to keep the questions alive? Images are everywhere in today's rapid-fire world. So many we walk on by. But Europe 700 years ago was a world without images. No paintings on your walls, no billboards barking at you on the streets. But then you left that ordinary world and entered a church. You have now entered the image world, the world of art, and it's a world like none you've seen before. All around you, 360 degrees, scenes of the life of Christ, not just hanging on the walls, but embedded in their very plasterwork. Saints, angels, disciples, and worshippers. The colours leap off the walls like some sort of miracle. It's bigger and bolder than anything else you know. You're overwhelmed, you're overpowered. But in the centuries that follow, something changes painting forever. Painting comes down from church walls and becomes something sold for private viewing. The commercial image market had opened for trade. Paintings of God were on their way out of the building. To get a handle on the power God had in art, we need to leave New Zealand shores. We need to travel back in time and consider the rock-solid faith that an artist would have had 500 years ago. Back then, Christianity ruled the Western world, and biblical stories were one way to reinforce the rules. But the church also knew all about the power of images to hammer its values home. On the day the Bellini brothers began this triptych, they didn't ask themselves if they were going to paint pop, or paint abstract, or paint expressionist. There was no doubt about what a painter was meant to make at this time. They painted religious scenes, they painted God, and there was no doubt about how God should look either. So at this time, painters are making signs and symbols to live by. They are using codes that any viewer would understand, and which are a kind of moral cement in society. And the big symbol, the one that no one had any trouble recognizing, is the cross, the crucifixion. But the question for a painter is, when you are painting something that's been portrayed thousands of times, how do you make it real? And this painting, this crucifixion, by the Renaissance painter Veronese, gives us some answers. First, make them feel the heft and reality of these bodies, like the haunches of this enormous horse which leads us into the painting. Tell a story that unfolds, in this case, from right to left. And the details that we see, this figure rising from his grave, the seated woman, they're all from St. Matthew's Gospel. So Veronese is dramatising this story, he's energising it. And the biggest move, the one that seals the narrative deal, that really brings the story home, is in a way the simplest. Against that background of thunderous, lead-bellied clouds, the only bright light is the body of Christ on the cross. Light and dark says it all. Veronese brings religious art down from the heavens and into the real world. And painters everywhere start to ask, does painting have to serve religion? Instead of heavenly worlds, they started painting this one. Landscapes were painted to hang in the lounges of the wealthy. Nudes were something private and sensual, made to hang in the bedroom. And this romance with the physical world triggers one of the biggest breakups in the history of art. Painting and religion were parting ways. And when that happened, painting found itself with two huge problems on its hands. It had a housing crisis and it had a power crisis. Where was it going to live, and what on earth was painting for? Back when religion ruled the Western world, the church was art's natural home. But when religion and painting parted ways, painting found itself living somewhere new. On the clean, bright walls of modern art galleries. And wandering those galleries, past rude painting, angry painting, pop painting, face painting, flower painting, and the rest. You get the distinct feeling religious painting is not where it's at. All those angels and crucifixions and miracles slowly broke apart, and 1,000 new kinds of painting rushed onto the scene. And you might say, let's just forget it. Art and faith have parted ways. Painting is no longer a spiritual business. But some painters do not want to forget it. They believe that art can still plug into the big questions about life and death. And they do it by grounding old stories and symbols in the here and now. Paul Gauguin raises his crucifixion on the rolling golden hills of Brittany. The Australian Arthur Boyd plays out Bible stories in the tangle of the Australian bush. And time and again, British visionary Stanley Spencer plays out scenes of resurrection in his village of Cookham. Painted on a chapel wall, the resurrection of the soldiers is Spencer's astonishing tribute to the dead men of World War I, his own brother among them. Hundreds of crosses tumbling into our space like a lorry load of lumber. Reviving the old signs and symbols for the war-torn modern world, Spencer creates a religious painting that's awesomely hopeful and devastatingly sad. Back in New Zealand, all religious roads lead to Colin McCahon. No one tussles so directly with doubt and faith. Doubt that art still speaks to people, and faith that it must try to. It's great seeing this little work. It's painted 1943 in the midst of World War II. The candle is the flame of faith and art, burning in a war-darkened world. If the painting looks clunky, it's meant to. Urgent style for urgent times. The problem was, for many viewers, it looked like he couldn't paint. What's a bit heartbreaking about this is that those were the people McCahon wanted to talk to with this urgent, direct language. And the thing that he used to speak most directly was what they hated most. The words that appear here and which grow and unspool and ribbon across his paintings, right across his career. The words rise from the mouths of biblical figures like sacred comic book bubbles. They multiply and fill the sky like warnings the whole world can hear. This flow of light and language falls and rises like the pulse on a heart monitor. McCahon is striving in an age of doubt to make his message heard. And two simple words keep coming back. When Moses asks what the Creator's name is, God answers, "I am that I am." Sometimes McCahon's "I am" is monumental, a whopping statement of being and belief. Other times it's muttered anxiously, as if McCahon's scared he might disappear into the darkness. But the biggest "I am" is impossible to miss. Victory Over Death 2 is one of the biggest paintings Colin McCahon ever made, and it's also the source of the biggest controversy. The painting retells a biblical story. Christ has just foreseen that he'll die on the cross, and he's calling to God for reassurance. But there are no faces or figures in Victory Over Death 2, just that big, booming "I am." And if, like me, you don't like to be preached at, then this is enough to get you grumpy. Isn't it a bit bossy? The artist is a kind of megaphone for God. We're here for painting, not a sermon, right? We sure are. Move closer and notice something in the blackness, an enormous shadowy am. And the effect of this is to turn the proclamation, I am, into a looming question, am I? Going close is also our chance to read the words of the story. McCahon paints each voice as a lifeline moving through the darkness. We hear Christ worrying, crying for reassurance. And then the big event. It's the eye of God replying, splitting the painting like a thunderclap. But there's even more to see. The eye is full of depth and movement, like clouds seen from an aeroplane's cargo door. So this word is not a blunt statement, but a door you're invited to step through, the opening for a leap of faith. McCahon has done so much more than just illustrate a biblical story. He puts us in the place Christ has in that story, poised between doubt and faith. You see this when you step back again. The big I am and the big am I constantly circle each other. The endless question of faith. For McCahon, the problem used to be that viewers treated him with scorn. Today, the problem is that he's treated with nothing but reverence. Some artists, thank God, refuse to kneel at his feet.
I am the one.
New Zealand artist Ronnie Van Hout has replayed McCahon's Big I Am many times in many media. But the eye in Ronnie's art isn't a godlike figure. He's overwhelmed, full of self-doubt. Ronnie's turned the giant of New Zealand art into a pint-sized action figure. Ronnie's generation was the first to be taught the official story of McCahon's greatness, and he goes digging for trouble in McCahon's famous spiritual landscapes. What was it about those old figures like McCahon that you felt needed renovating or turfing out or burying in the earth?
And like a lot of modernist things, they were held up as great geniuses and they made masterpieces. And the weight of that you had to actually come up with masterpieces and be a genius is, I think, too much for anyone to kind of bear.
So why did you do it? Why did you shrink McCahon down?
Well, you can't talk about it, it becomes, he's sort of untouchable or something like that, and yet, no, nothing's perfect. The fact that he drank a lot and lives in some terrible conditions. In fact, that's probably what was more interesting to me, What are his failings?
Do you see McCahon as like a believer or a doubter?
I totally see him as the doubter who doubts God's existence, but he's still asking the questions, what happens if, say God doesn't exist. And in this, my era, those kind of ideas were sort of, debunked.
One of my favourite of your riffs on the Big I Am is that work called I'm Not Here. There's all the placards and they say I'm not in, I'm not out. What were you on about in that work?
The I am statement, that's a universal thing, but it's also something that you can reference as a kind of a mirror. So you see where you are, now. So what does the word I am mean today, So it's something that constantly shifts. It's the question that doesn't shift, It's just the answer changes. And I suppose it's not such a heavy question these days, You're allowed to be humorous about it,
Ronnie handles weighty subjects lightly. He brings McCahon back to earth by placing a banana skin in the master's path.
People talk about, particularly the models I made of him painting, as kind of cutting him down to size, but it sort of really wasn't that. It was actually dealing with something in history.
McCahon talked about art as a way of grappling with the human condition. Is that what art offers still? Grappling with existence, with soul stuff, with the big questions?
When you ask the question, what is art, you're asking, who am I? And, what is happening today? But I think the way that you deal with it is to, you're looking in the mirror and you make a funny face, I think,
Yeah.
Poke your tongue at yourself.
When painting split from religion, it looked like the end of a great story. But what we encounter instead is a phenomenal tale of renewal. Modern artists connecting the old symbols to our landscape, our times and our doubts. And reminding us that sometimes the soul is best explored not with a sermon but a joke. But what I want to know now is whether faith still fuels painting, or is art literally beyond belief? If you made art in the 14th century, there was no question you believed. But for painters in the 20th century, all this was thrown into doubt. They were living in a world where people were proclaiming that God was dead. And for these artists, it seems that the old visual language of religious painting may itself be dying. And what they want to do is evoke those old sacred subjects, but using a new language, the language of abstract painting. No one does this as movingly as American Mark Rothko, who removed the old signs and symbols altogether. What's left are fields of open, floating, boundless colour. Rothko's striving to show how religious experience might feel in an age of doubt. What is it? Is it even there? Then there are artists who work for decades in that abstract way, but one morning wake up and look around at the confusion and the strife and the injustice of the world and say to themselves, I need those old signs and symbols back. For Philip Gaston, art's loss of faith in those images meant it had also lost touch with the world. He brings the images back in this monster work, Pit. The Red Sea parts and the earth opens to reveal a hellish tangle of legs. It's a last judgment for the age of the Vietnam War, a religious painting that doubts whether religion is any consolation. And in New Zealand, questions of faith simmer away quietly in the art of Darren George.
I'm not going to drive home some sort of aggressive message.
This Christian, Maori and Pākehā artist makes paintings that look cool and quiet. But then you read a title like The Whare of Moses and go back for another look. White lines start crackling with spiritual voltage and black depths begin to resound. What do they suggest for you?
Well, these forms are book forms.
These represent a kind of storehouse of knowledge, of spiritual knowledge.
Yeah. And I think if you think about Māori culture, the information is handed on via an oral tradition, whereas within Christian traditions, our knowledge has come from the Bible or from reading texts.
There's a power of tradition and meaning humming beneath Darren's surfaces. He likes to play that contemporary game, do more with less. There are no crucifixes, no angels, no God. Instead, religious art's symbolic forms are packed down into simple shapes, ladders that raise the eye up.
The idea of stepping stones into heaven is, it's a perfect parallel.
Bars of sizzling white light and blackness that holds its own light. Black is something we associate often with dark emotions, the dark side of things. But you use it in paintings which are about faith. How does black carry those meanings for you?
Black is the thing that highlights the light quality that I'm trying to get with my symbols. One of the things that this will have on it is these little folders, folders that you have in a filing cabinet. And someone's come up to one of my previous works and stood in front of it and seen themselves reflected in it. And they said, well, hang on, am I in that folder? Is my life in that folder? Well, it is, because I can see myself in it, So I like all those kind of associations as well.
With those deep black surfaces, Darren does what any contemporary spiritual artist must do. He leaves space for us in the work. He provides a springboard, not a sermon.
If I go back to the Bible, Joshua was going to take the people of Israel into the promised land across the River Jordan. God dried up the waters, and so the nation went through the ground to the other side. Now, God said, Joshua, I want you to set up some stones. And whenever you look at those simple stones, they are going to remind you of something that I did for my people. Now, all that monument was just some stones that were put together. It wasn't carved, it didn't actually depict the scene of what happened there. And I think, for me, I kind of do the same sort of thing. I set up these very simple monuments, just great big canvases of black with a couple of little struts and things like that in them, and then I come along with my story.
And you've used that word waru, haven't you? What does that mean?
Well, waru is the number 8 in Māori. Within biblical texts, 8 always has to do with resurrection or new life. So if we can think about the 7 days of creation, on the 8th day, something new happened. It was a new era. We can think about Noah's Ark, and there was 8 people that were on Noah's Ark when the world was destroyed, and then 8 people stepped out of the Ark into a new era. So 8 became for me just a symbol of new life.
And the symbol surged into spectacular life in Darren's show Pulse, where it was rendered over and over like a chant, within a room where every wall pulsed with paint.
The idea behind that was to set up like a meeting house, like a giant wharenui. That wall that I put the waru word on over and over and over again, traditionally that wall was always the wall of death. So I was changing that, making it into a bit of a chapel, trying to make the wall of death into the wall of life.
5 metres high and 50 metres long, Pulse fused church, wharenui and gallery. And in doing so showed how much faith Darren has that simple forms can speak as powerfully as any other kind of imagery. Does this really simple, pared-back language seem like the right way to convey such complex, big ideas?
I think so. You don't sort out all your painting issues and stuff in the first 5 or 6 years. As a painter, I don't believe I'm going to get very good until I'm in my 50s, which is quite a long way away. So I've just got this, I guess it's a leap of faith, that just as I keep chipping away, I'm going to get closer and closer to kind of the source of what I'm about, and also about what the work's about.
For a long time, painting was bound to religion, with God and Jesus centre stage. But when the church's power started fading, painters had to find new ways to address God's presence or absence. Some invent fresh signs and symbols in their quest to make painting speak urgently. Others remove them entirely, instead evoking things of the spirit with silent surfaces and stark painted forms. Old religious painting says, "Believe in me." What these contemporary artists are saying is, worry and wonder with me about the world, about belief, about the place and the power of painting. To engage with modern painting is to discover the pleasures, the difficult pleasures of doubt, of wrestling with these big questions. And to me, asking those questions isn't just interesting, it's essential.